Negotiating. Active listening and communication skills for negotiations. Written by Tom Hendricks. Narrated by Doug Green. Chapter 1. What is negotiating? Negotiating is a method by which people settle differences. It is a procedure by which compromise or a contract is reached while staying away from arguing and dispute. In any argument, people understandably aim to achieve the best possible solution for their position, or maybe an organization they represent. However, the principles of fairness, seeking mutual benefit, and maintaining a relationship are the keys to an effective result. Specific forms of negotiation are used in many circumstances: international affairs, the legal system, federal government, commercial disputes, or domestic relationships, as examples. Nevertheless, general negotiation skills can be learned and used in a large range of activities. Negotiation abilities can be a big advantage in resolving any differences which develop between you and others. Phases of negotiation. In order to achieve a preferable result, it may be helpful to follow an organized technique to negotiation. For instance, in a work circumstance, a meeting could really need to be arranged in which all parties that are involved can come together. The process of negotiation typically involves the following phases: preparation, conversation, explanation of objectives, negotiate everything towards a win-win solution, agreement, implementation of a course of action. 1. Preparation. Right before a negotiation occurs, a choice needs to be made concerning when and where a conference will take place to talk about the issue and who will go to it. Setting a limited time scale can also be useful to stop the disagreement from continuing. This phase includes guaranteeing all the essential facts of the situation are known so as to clarify your own position. In the work example I previously mentioned, this would include knowing the rules of your organization, to whom help is offered, when help is not felt proper, and the grounds for such refusals. Your organization might well have policies to which you can refer in preparation for the negotiation. Having a preparation before discussing the dispute will help to keep from further conflict and unnecessarily wasting time at the time of the meeting. 2. Conversation. Throughout this stage, people or members of each side advance the case as they see it, that is, their understanding of the circumstance. Important skills during this stage include questioning, listening, and clarifying. Sometimes it is handy to take notes at the time of the discussion stage to record all points advanced in case there's need for more information. It's incredibly essential to listen because when difference takes place, it is simple to make the error of saying way too much and listening insufficient. Each side should have an equal opportunity to prove their case. 3. Explaining your objectives. From the discussion, the objectives, interests, and perspectives of both sides of the dispute need to be clarified. It is valuable to note these factors in order of priority. Through this clarification, it is usually possible to identify or establish some common ground. Information is an important part of the negotiation process. Without it, misconceptions are very likely to occur, which might cause problems and barriers to reaching a valuable result. 4. Negotiate towards a win-win outcome. This stage focuses on what's described as a win-win result, where both sides feel they have acquired something positive through the process of negotiation, and both sides feel their point of view has been taken into account. A win-win result is typically the best outcome. While this could not always be possible through negotiation, it must be the ultimate goal. Suggestions of alternative strategies and compromises need to be considered at this moment. Compromises are often positive alternatives which can usually attain greater benefit for all concerned compared to holding to the original positions. 5. Agreement. Agreement can be accomplished once understanding of both sides' perspectives and interests have been considered. It is important for everyone included to keep an open mind to achieve an acceptable resolution. any contract needs to be made flawlessly clear so that both sides know what has been determined. 6. Carrying out a strategy. From the arrangement, a course of action has to be carried out to carry through the decision. Failure to agree. If the process of negotiation breaks down and arrangement can't be reached, then rescheduling an additional meeting is required. This avoids all parties being involved in heated conversation or argument, which not only loses time, but can also damage future relationships. At the subsequent meeting, the phases of negotiation should be repeated. Any new ideas or interests should be considered and the circumstance looked at afresh. At this stage, it may also be useful to look at other alternative solutions and/or bring in another individual to moderate. Informal negotiation. There are times when there is a need to work out more informally. At such times, when a difference of opinion emerges, it might not be possible or proper to go through the stages set out above in an official manner. Nevertheless, recalling the bottom lines in the stages of formal negotiation could be really helpful in a range of informal circumstances. In any negotiation, the following 3 components are essential and likely to affect the supreme result of the negotiation. Attitudes. Knowledge. Interpersonal abilities. Attitudes. All negotiation is highly affected by underlying attitudes to the process itself. For instance, attitudes to the issues and characters involved in the particular case, or attitudes linked to personal needs for recognition. Always understand that negotiation isn't an arena for the realization of individual accomplishments. There can be resentment of the need to work out by those in authority. Certain functions of negotiation may influence an individual's behavior. For instance, some people may end up being defensive. Knowledge. The more knowledge you have of the issues in question, the greater your involvement in the process of negotiation. Simply put, good preparation is important. Do your homework and collect as much information about the issues as you can. Additionally, the way issues are worked out should be comprehended, as negotiating will need different techniques in different circumstances. Interpersonal skills. Good interpersonal abilities are important for efficient settlements, both in official situations and in less official or one-to-one settlements. These skills include efficient verbal communication, listening. Decreasing misinterpretations is a key part of reliable negotiation. Rapport building, issue solving, decision making, assertiveness, handling tight spots. Chapter 2. Active Listening. Active listening is an ability that can be acquired and developed with practice. Nonetheless, active listening can be hard to master and will, because of that, take time and patience to develop. Active listening means, as its name suggests, actively listening. That is, totally concentrating on what is being said, rather than just passively hearing the message of the speaker. Active listening involves listening with all senses, as well as giving full attention to the speaker. It is essential that the active listener is also seen to be listening. Otherwise, the speaker might conclude that what they're talking about is boring to the listener. Interest can be conveyed to the speaker by utilizing both verbal and nonverbal messages, such as preserving eye contact, nodding your head and smiling, concurring by saying yes or simply mm-hmm, to encourage them to continue. By supplying this feedback, the person speaking will typically feel more at ease and thus communicate more easily, openly, and truthfully. Listening is the most fundamental component of interpersonal communication skills. Listening is not something that just happens. That is hearing. Listening is an active process in which a conscious choice is made to listen to and comprehend the messages of the speaker. Listeners should remain neutral and non-judgmental. This means trying not to take sides or form opinions, especially early in the discussion. Active listening is also about patience. Stops briefly and brief periods of silence should be accepted. Listeners should not be tempted to jump in with questions or comments each time there are several seconds of silence. Active listening involves giving the other person time to explore their thoughts and feelings. They should therefore be given appropriate time for that. Active listening not only means focusing totally on the speaker, but also actively demonstrating verbal and nonverbal signs of listening. Usually, speakers want listeners to demonstrate active listening by responding properly to what they are saying. Proper reactions to listening can be both verbal and nonverbal, examples of which are listed below. Signs of active listening. Nonverbal signs of mindful or active listening. This is a generic list of nonverbal signs of listening. In other words, people who are listening are more likely to display at the very least some of these signs. Nevertheless, these signs could not be appropriate in all circumstances and across all cultures. Smile. Small smiles can be used to show that the listener is taking note of what is being said, or as a way of concurring or being more than happy about the messages being gotten. Combined with nods of the head, smiles can be powerful in affirming that messages are being listened to and understood. Eye contact. It is normal and generally motivating for the listener to look at the speaker. Eye contact can nevertheless be daunting, specifically for more shy speakers. Gauge how much eye contact is proper for any given circumstance. Integrate eye contact with smiles and other nonverbal messages to encourage the speaker. Posture. Posture can tell a lot about the sender and receiver in interpersonal interactions. The mindful listener tends to lean slightly forward or sideways while sitting. Other signs of active listening could include a small slant of the head or resting the head on one hand. Mirroring. Automatic reflection or mirroring of any facial expressions used by the speaker can be a sign of mindful listening. Those reflective expressions can help to show compassion and empathy in more emotional situations. Attempting to knowingly simulate facial expressions, for example, not automatic reflection of expressions, can be a sign of inattention. Distraction. The active listener won't be distracted and thus will avoid fidgeting, looking at a clock or watch, doodling, having fun with their hair, or choosing their fingernails. Verbal signs of attentive or active listening. Positive reinforcement. Although a strong signal of attentiveness, caution must be used when using positive verbal reinforcement. Although some positive words of encouragement might be useful to the speaker, the listener should use them moderately so as not to sidetrack from what's being said or place unnecessary emphasis on parts of the message. Casual and regular use of words and phrases such as excellent, yes, or indeed can become irritating to the speaker. It's usually better to elaborate and clarify why you are concurring with a certain point. Remembering. The human mind is infamously bad at remembering details, particularly for any length of time. Nevertheless, remembering several bottom lines, or even the name of the speaker, can help to strengthen that the messages sent have been gotten and comprehended. That is, listening has achieved success. Keeping in mind specifics, ideas, and ideas from former conversations proves that attention was kept and is likely to encourage the speaker to continue. Throughout longer exchanges, it could be proper to make very quick notes to serve as a memory jog when questioning or clarifying later. Questioning. The listener can show that they have been focusing by asking relevant questions and/or making declarations that build or help to clarify what the speaker has said. By asking relevant questions, the listener also helps to enhance that they have an interest in what the speaker has been saying. Reflection. Reflecting is closely repeating or paraphrasing what the speaker has said so as to show comprehension. Reflection is a powerful skill that can strengthen the message of the speaker and show understanding. Information. Clarifying includes asking questions of the speaker to ensure that the correct message has been gotten. Clarification normally includes the application of open questions which enables the speaker to go deeper into certain points as needed. Summing up. Repeating a summary of what has been said back to the speaker is a technique used by the listener to repeat what has been said in their own words. Summarizing includes taking the bottom lines of the received message and reiterating them in a logical and clear way, giving the speaker a chance to correct if needed. Chapter 3. Communicating in Difficult Situations. Many people want to stay away from dispute and potentially stressful situations. This is human nature. People usually find it easier to stay away from interacting something that they think is going to be controversial or bad, postponing the communication and letting the circumstance fester. A manager could hold back telling a staff member that the requirement of work is unsatisfactory. You may delay having that difficult conversation with your partner, particularly if it concerns some sort of wrongdoing, monetary or emotional concerns. A child might put off telling their parents or caretakers that they're fighting with classes at school. Most people can think of times when they have put off having that challenging discussion. The majority of people will also recognize that putting off the challenging conversation eases short-term anxiety. Nonetheless, constantly delaying difficult communication situations often leads to feelings of frustration, guilt, irritation with oneself, anger, a decrease in self-confidence, and, ultimately, more stress and anxiety. By following some easy standards and by using some well-tuned communication abilities, interacting in difficult situations ends up being simpler. There are two unique kinds of challenging discussion: prepared and unplanned. Planned discussions occur when the subject has been given thought. They're prepared as the time, place, and other scenarios have been organized or are chosen for a real reason. Planned hard conversations could include asking an employer for a pay rise or perhaps telling your parents or caregivers that you are leaving home to live elsewhere. Though these circumstances are by their nature hard, they are controlled, and as long as time has been brought to prepare and think properly about how others may respond, they can typically wind up being easier than thought of. Unplanned, challenging conversations happen on the spur of the moment. These are typically fueled by anger, which can, in extreme cases, lead to aggressiveness. Often, after an unplanned, challenging conversation, we feel a surge of feeling, regret or shame if things didn't go too well, or possibly a boost to self-confidence and self-confidence if they did. After such encounters, it is wise to show and learn a lot from our experiences, looking for positives and ways of enhancing future, unplanned, challenging discussions. Certain jobs and roles need tough communication to be managed expertly, with empathy, tact, discretion, and clarity. Some examples are: political leaders typically need to communicate bad news, for example, failures in their departments, scandals, not meeting targets, and so on. As politicians are in the general public eye, they might be judged by how well they communicate bad news. They will worry about their electorate and the consequences for their self-image, their political party, and their country. It isn't unusual for political leaders to use spin medical professionals and public relation masters who can advise, ease personal blame, and find positives in possibly bad news. Another technique sometimes used by political leaders is to coincide the release of bad news with some other unassociated big newspaper article, with the hope that media and public attention will be focused in other places. Doctors and other healthcare professionals might really need to communicate bad or unforeseen news to clients and relations of clients, for instance, diagnosis and prognosis. Such experts will have gotten training and will have operated in practice situations to help them to deliver such news successfully and sensitively. Authorities and other police officers might need to communicate bad news to victims of criminal offense or their family and friends. Such experts will have gotten at least standard training in providing bad news. Supervisors in organizations may really need to communicate hard information on some levels to staff who are underperforming or if redundancies are needed. Managers could also really need to report bad news upwards to directors or board members. Maybe profits are down or some arm of the company is failing. Your job. Whatever your kind of work, there will be times when you'll need to be able to communicate tough info efficiently to others. That is an important employability skill, something that many employers will search for. You might be asked to give examples in a job interview or at the time of some sort of appraisal or professional development program. Emotion and change. There are two primary aspects that make communication seem challenging: emotion and change. Emotion. People tend to look at feelings as being positive or negative. Happiness is positive, and because of that, sadness must be negative. Calmness is positive, while tension and anxiety are negative. Feelings are, however, a natural reaction to situations that we find ourselves in, and the only time that we really need to be concerned is when we regularly feel emotions inappropriate to our existing situation. Feelings are thus not positive or negative, but proper or improper. When faced with unexpected news, we might find ourselves being upset, annoyed, angry, or perhaps extremely happy and ecstatic. It is valuable to recognize how we respond to things emotionally and to think of different ways in which emotions can be controlled if necessary. Similarly, if we really need to communicate information which may have an emotional effect on another person, it is practical to anticipate what that influence might be and to customize what we say or write accordingly. Change. Usually, tough discussions are about some sort of change. For example, changes in your job or ways of doing things, changes in financial resources or health, changes in a relationship. It is essential to remember that change is inescapable. Various people deal with change in different ways. Some react extremely positively to a significant change in circumstances, while others may only have the ability to see issues and trouble in the beginning. If possible, it is beneficial to think of the positive side of the change and the potential chances that it might bring. It is better for a person's wellness if they are able to embrace change as positively as possible, hence helping to decrease stress and anxiety. Dealing with difficult conversations. There has to be a balance between interacting something challenging and being as sensitive as possible to those concerned. The skill set required to do this could appear rather contradictory, as you might really need to be both firm and gentle in your technique. Recommended abilities include info event. Make sure you have your facts straight before you start. Know what you are going to say and why you're going to say it. You should try to prepare for any questions or issues others might have and think carefully about how you are going to answer questions. Being assertive. Once you are sure that something needs to be communicated, then do so in an assertive way. Do not find yourself backing down or changing your mind mid-conversation unless naturally there is excellent reason to do so. Being empathic. Put yourself in the other person's shoes and think about how they will feel about what you are telling them. How would you feel if the roles were reversed? Give others time to ask questions and make comments. Being prepared to negotiate. Usually a tight spot requires a specific amount of negotiation. Be prepared for this. When you are negotiating, go for a win-win result. That is, some way in which all parties can benefit. Using appropriate verbal and nonverbal language. Speak plainly, keeping away from any jargon that other parties could not understand. Give eye contact and try to sit or stand in a relaxed way. Do not use argumentative language or nonverbal communication. Listen. When we are stressed out, we tend to listen less well, so you should try to relax and listen thoroughly to the views, opinions, and emotions of the other person or people. Use explanation and reflection techniques to offer feedback and show that you were listening. Staying calm and focused. Communication ends up being easier when we are calm. Take some deep breaths and try to maintain an air of peace. Others are more likely to stay calm if you do. Keep concentrated on what you want to say. Don't deviate or get distracted from the reason that you are communicating. Chapter 4. Assertiveness. Being assertive can help us feel good about ourselves, improving self-confidence and personal confidence. Sometimes the way we react and respond to others can make us feel insufficient, guilty, or regretful. Those might be signs of passive behavior. We might also feel mad and critical of others during discussions. This may signify more aggressive behavior. When practicing these assertiveness strategies, it is very important to remember what assertiveness is and its significance in the communication process. Being assertive is not the exact same as being aggressive. On the contrary, assertiveness indicates standing up for what you believe. Assertiveness is expressing your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and viewpoints in a truthful and appropriate way. As assertiveness needs to be motivated in others, it is also crucial to recall that we should always respect the thoughts, feelings, viewpoints, and beliefs of others. Assertiveness enables individuals to assert their personal rights without undermining the rights of others. Assertiveness is considered a balanced response, being neither passive nor aggressive, with self-confidence playing a fundamental part. An assertive individual responds as an equivalent to others and aims to be open in expressing their wishes, thoughts, and emotions. General techniques of assertiveness. 2 crucial methods that can assist assertiveness are referred to as fogging and the stuck record technique. Fogging. Fogging is a useful method if people are behaving in a manipulative or aggressive way. Rather than arguing back, fogging aims to give a minimal, calm response using terms that are soothing but not defensive, while at the same time not agreeing to meet demands. Fogging involves concurring with any truth that might be contained within declarations, even if they are critical. By not reacting in the anticipated way, simply put by being defensive or argumentative, the other person will stop conflict, as the wanted effect isn't being accomplished. When the environment is less heated, it will be possible to talk about the problems more reasonably. Fogging is so termed because the individual imitates a wall of fog into which arguments are thrown but not returned. Example circumstance. What time do you call this? You're almost a half hour late. I'm fed up with you letting me down all of the time. Fogging reaction. Yeah, I am later than I wish to be, and I can see this has frustrated you. Annoyed? Naturally I am annoyed. I've been waiting on ages. You truly should try to think about other individuals a bit more. Fogging reaction. Yeah, I was concerned that you would be left waiting practically half an hour. Well, why were you late? The stuck record strategy. The stuck record technique employs the key assertive ability of calm determination. It includes repeating what you want time and time again without raising the tone of your voice, blowing up, irritated, or associated with side issues. Example situation. Imagine that you're returning something that's faulty to a shop. The conversation might go as follows. I bought these shoes last week and the heels have fallen off. I would like a refund, please. It looks like they've been worn a lot and these shoes were only created for occasional wear. Stuck record technique reaction? I have only had them a week and they're defective. I would like a refund, please. You cannot expect me to give you your cash back after you have used them out. Stuck record strategy response. The heels have fallen off after only a week and I would like a refund, please. And so on. Continually repeating a request will ensure the conversation doesn't become sidetracked and associated with unimportant argument. The essential thing is to remain calm, be very clear in what you want, stick to the point and not forfeit. Accept a compromise only if you are happy with the result. Positive inquiry. Positive query is a simple strategy for managing positive comments such as praise and compliments. People often struggle with reacting to applause and compliments, especially those with lower self-confidence, as they may feel inadequate or that the positive remarks aren't justified. It is essential to give positive feedback to others when appropriate, but also to react appropriately to positive feedback that you get. Positive inquiry is used to find out more details about the compliment or appreciation given and agree with it. Example situation. Sender: You made an exceptional meal tonight. It was tasty. Receiver: Thanks. Yeah, it was good. What did you like about it in particular? This is different from a passive response that might have been, It was no effort, or It was just a basic recipe. Negative inquiry. The opposite of positive query is negative inquiry. Unfavorable inquiry is a way to respond to more negative exchanges, like getting criticism. Handling criticism can be hard. Remember that any criticism received is just somebody's viewpoint. Negative inquiry is used to learn more about critical comments and is a pretty good option to more aggressive or mad reactions to criticism. Example circumstance. Sender: That meal was practically inedible. I can't remember the last time I ate something so horrible. Receiver: It wasn't the best. Precisely what didn't you like about it? This differs from an aggressive response that might have been, How dare you? I spent all afternoon preparing that meal. Or, well, that's the last time I cook a meal for you. Learn how to think about your responses and how you behave when you communicate with others. By utilizing techniques designed to make you more assertive, you will find that your communication and other social interactions are generally more positive. Chapter 5. More about negotiation skills. Next, I asked, how many of you feel like you might be proficient in negotiation and are sturdy at it, but you don't really love it and you feel like you could enhance? About a third of these successful business owners raised their hands. Finally, I asked, how many of you feel like you aren't strong or confident mediators? How many of you find yourselves avoiding negotiating, even if that means you'll face negative consequences because of it? Over 60% of the hands in the room went up for that. That floored me. Thinking about the business success that these people have had, I thought the numbers would be manipulated far more to the first two questions. I realized that we had a lot of work to do. I said, look, in a day and a half, we're not going to cover all of the different negotiating tactics that are out there. Rather, we're going to start off with the 10 most crucial negotiating methods and skills that you will need. Now I want to list the 5 most essential for you to start with. 1. Get clear on your working out goals. Now, you might think this is apparent, but the reality is that most people who go into a deal haven't thought of what they want to leave with. To get clear about your objectives, there are 3 crucial questions you should ask yourself. What's the best possible result? Let's say you're negotiating to sell a product, service, or company. What's the most you could realistically go after? Is it $50,000 for your service contract? Or maybe $22 million to sell your firm? What's your bottom line? This describes the least acceptable offer. If you're the seller, what's the lowest offer you'd want to accept? And if you are the purchaser, what's the most you'd want to pay? What's your plan B? Roger Fisher and William Ury, members of the Harvard Negotiation Project and the authors of Getting to Yes, call this your BATNA, your best alternative to a worked-out arrangement. What are you going to do if you do not reach an arrangement? Of course, you shouldn't broadcast your answers to questions A or B, but you need to know all of these things going in. Even if you are not completely sure of your answers, just having a sense of what they might be can help you. As you become clearer about each of these aspects, negotiating will end up being easier. As a result, you should become certain that as you deal with increasingly more important settlements, you spend more and more time pinning down the answers to these 3 questions. 2. Decide on your core negotiation strategy. The second significant idea we covered was the significance of entering into the negotiation with a core negotiation method. Lorraine, one of my business coaching clients at this retreat, brought up a particularly intriguing negotiation obstacle that she's dealing with. She owns the 6,000 square foot commercial structure that her company runs out of, and the acre of land that it's on. But the city wants to take out an 8-foot easement on the front of her property, which will ruin her car park. When I asked Lorraine what her method was, she said that she would tell the representative from the city planning department that this easement negatively and unjustly impacts the value of her property. But I pointed out that a city organizer may not be specifically concerned about the value of her property, so I asked Lorraine to give me more info about why it lowers the value of her property. It ended up that one of the reasons is that she has a lot of huge industrial trucks that are available in and out of her property with big equipment. If the city takes those 8 feet of property from her, the trucks will need to back into the street every time they want to get in and out. So I made a recommendation. If it were me, I would not go into the negotiation through the entrance of value and fairness. Rather, I would come in through the entrance of safety and liability. I'd say that it is not safe to have the trucks backing into the street, and that it produces a lot of liability for both me and the city. And that's what creating a core negotiation strategy is all about. Finding the doorway that you want to enter the negotiation through. That could be the entrance of safety and liability or of value, the entrance of competition or of future business. Again, if it's a small negotiation, for instance, if you're buying $1,200 worth of equipment, you're probably not going to put a lot of energy into collecting lots and lots of info. But even then, you might spend 5 minutes online seeing about rates elsewhere and what choices exist. Then you can come in through the doorway of competition. You could ask, who are your rivals? And why does not everyone buy from you? Just by asking questions like those, you can guarantee yourself a much better cost or better terms. And that's what this second step is all about, finding the technique that will move you closer to your best possible result. 3. Understand your negotiating signature. You have a signature in negotiations, a lot like you have one with documents. That signature is the regular manner in which you set about a negotiation. There are those who try to go in and beat the other individual up on the price. Other people are truly intimidated, reticent, and scared to request anything. Those kinds of people work out gently and typically wind up giving in. Others are very good at building trust, and yet the moment the conversation turns toward price and terms, all of that rapport disappears. They make a conspicuous switch from discussion mode into negotiation mode. Comprehending your default signature helps you know what you're dealing with. That is an especially critical step to growth as a negotiator because there's just one thing you can ensure when it comes to settlements. Whenever you work out, you'll be there. You can't ask yourself to leave the room when the settlements start. So, become familiar with your own character, style, and preferences. Figure out what sort of behavior you have defaulted towards in the past, how comfortable you were in your former settlements. 4. Build motivation. One of the most effective things you can do in a negotiation is extract why the other party wants to make a deal. You can do this by asking questions and building negotiating routes. For example, if you're purchasing services from an IT vendor, try saying something like, "Tell me about your IT services. I get email offers for IT services all the time. How are your services different from the services they're offering?" Asking questions about their competition and why they want to work with you, what's in it for them, builds your negotiating counterpart's inspiration. 5. Play the reluctant party. It's human nature that in any negotiation, one party will aspire and the other will hesitate. Now, that may not be true whenever, but it's probably true 80% of the time. And let me tell you, I hate gambling, but give me 80% odds, and I'll hit Vegas and play the tables all the time. You just have to throw down when you've got those odds. So assume that your negotiation will be kind of like most others. It will have an eager party and a reluctant one. And if you use these 3 strategies, you can be certain that you're the hesitant one. First and foremost, use your body language to communicate your unwillingness. Think of what excited parties look like. They're tense, and they lean forward with their feet under them like they could jump to their feet or launch into a sprint any time. In contrast, hesitant parties kick back from the table and keep the stress in their bodies low. By putting their feet in front of their bodies at 90-degree angles and by rounding their shoulders, they communicate that they're not too eager to negotiate. Also, consider how you can manipulate your voice to sound more hesitant. Whereas excited parties talk rapidly and at a higher volume and pitch, hesitant parties speak gradually and softly. Doing this also lowers the pitch of their voices, and this makes them appear all the more hesitant. Finally, remember that unwilling parties qualify their language. They say things like, "I do not know if we could do X," or "Would this work for you if we could do it?" They also ask a lot of questions and pose a lot of challenges. They never ever say, "Yeah, let's do it." They don't show excitement. Every little thing is certified and controlled. Just by taking on the role of the unwilling party, you can actually force your challenger to handle the role of the excited party. I can assure you that these are the 5 most essential abilities to begin learning today. Okay, there are about 100 others that I would follow up with. However, if you have only the time, inclination, and energy to learn a few strategies, these 5 strategies will give you the biggest return on your financial investments of time and attention. This has been Negotiating. Active Listening and Communication Skills for Negotiations. Written by Tom Hendricks. Narrated by Doug Green. Negotiating. Negotiation Mistakes and Mediation Skills for Beginners. Written by Tom Hendricks. Narrated by Doug Green. Chapter 1. Mediation Skills. Mediation is the participation of an impartial third party to support and help those involved in a conflict to find a resolution. The key difference between negotiation and mediation is that in negotiation the parties included work out their own agreement. In mediation, they have the support of the third party, the mediator, to help them come to a contract. Mediation, whether official or informal, can often help resolve disputes that have exceeded the negotiation stage. Characteristics of mediation. An important element of mediation is that the arbitrator does not sort things out or make any decisions for the parties involved. Rather, he or she helps the parties involved collaborate to develop their own agreement. Mediation involves voluntary participation, face-to-face discussions between the parties in dispute, an impartial mediator with no decision-making power who helps those involved to comprehend each other's point of view and come to a contract, equal opportunities for all individuals to speak and explain their perspective, all relevant information being shared, a shared arrangement between the parties. Although there are many trained mediators working to resolve conflicts, anyone can function as a conciliator, whether in a dispute between co-workers or to bring 2 quarreling friends or neighbors together again. The mediation process. Although each conflict and every mediation process will be somewhat different, there are some steps which you're going to really need to consider in every case, and points to take into consideration. 1. Preparation. You will need to set out the guideline for the mediation process. Usually some fundamental guidelines of communication and confidentiality will be essential, but there might also be others significant to that circumstance. For example, you may want to set out that only one individual talks at a time, and while a person is talking, the others listen in silence, that there's to be no verbal abuse at any time, and that all that takes place stays private unless both parties accept discussing it outside mediation. You could also wish to set out the arbitrator's role, to be objective and help the parties to reach their solution, but also to protect the parties from one another if necessary. In addition, you should think about whether you should have separate meetings with each party to develop a much better grasp of the concerns before mediating a joint meeting. 2. Rebuilding and understanding the dispute. Your task at this stage is to listen to the participants' stories, whether together or individually, and clarify what they want to attain from the process. If you are meeting both participants together, it is helpful if you can sum up the bottom lines of dispute in a neutral way that both can concur upon, and propose a program for the discussion, an order in which issues should be talked about. It can also be helpful at this stage to name the emotions that participants are feeling to show that they have been recognized and comprehended. 3. Specifying points of agreement and conflict. At the time of this stage, your role is to help the individuals to move to a position where they begin to comprehend each other's perspective and can then start to fix a shared issue. One way to do this is to think of it as moving from a focus on the past to one on the future. It can also be valuable to use restating and summary in neutral terms to help the individuals identify parts of arrangement and to check understanding. It's exceptionally effective to reflect feelings back to the participants, as it shows both that they have been heard. Do not be scared to suggest a break for coffee or a walk outside, or perhaps an adjournment to another day if you think things are getting a bit heated. Time out is an important reflection opportunity for everybody. 4. Creating choices for agreement. A useful beginning point for this stage is to identify the simplest area, or the one on which there is most agreement, and suggest dealing with that first to give a fast win. Beneficial techniques for developing alternatives include brainstorming. At this stage, anything goes. You then really need to help the individuals to develop assessment criteria, which should ideally be unbiased and in order of significance. Your role here is chiefly to make certain that all individuals are equally associated with producing choices and developing evaluation requirements, and that they cover all parts of the issue. Make certain that you are showing their opinions and not your own, but you can mention linkages between options and/or issues. And when the choices have been examined, you'll need to guide them to a single solution that suits all parties and help them to fine-tune it if needed. 5. Developing a contract. Like goals, a contract must be specific, quantifiable, obtainable, reasonable, and time-bound. You can help the participants to achieve this by jotting down the proposal in neutral language and reading it back to them, jotting down individual points so they are clear and comprehended, explaining some vague points, for instance, by asking the participants to concur concrete behavioral changes with due dates for achievement. Keep from legalistic language and keep every little thing simple. Summarize progress and next steps, including but not limited to setting a due date for any future meetings and recognizing any remaining parts of difficulty and options for their resolution. Being positive about development and the fact that everyone has stayed engaged. Offering your continued support as a conciliator if needed. Guaranteeing both parties sign the contract then and there, and close the meeting once arrangement is reached. Abilities mediators need. A mediator needs a range of abilities including active listening skills, questioning and clarifying skills to grasp both the facts and the parts of debate, emotional intelligence to comprehend the underlying emotions, summing up skills to set out the bottom lines of debate and underlying feelings, and also to help the participants to reframe concerns in less emotive language. Empathy, to help each party to stand in each other's shoes and understand each other's perspective. Maybe what's most important is that an arbitrator must not take sides or be seen to be acting unfairly. You will thus really need to acknowledge points made by both parties and spend equal time with everyone or on their concerns. It's never going to help to explain that somebody is being unreasonable, and yet you can help these people take a reality check by asking what they would consider a sensible result, and after that, asking whether they think the other party would agree. Although a little humbleness is always an advantage, it is necessary to recall that mediation may not always work, and that it's not always the fault of the arbitrator if it does not. For example, if participants do not come prepared to find a shared resolution, it is going to be tough to moderate one. Cross-cultural disputes are always going to be hard to moderate, because what is acceptable behavior in one society might be completely undesirable in another. A great mediator will always try to be knowledgeable about what else is going on, attempting to understand any hidden agendas and barriers to reliable problem solving. A reliable conciliator will, at the same time, have the ability to distance themselves from the problem. The most crucial part of the mediator is to help others solve their issues in a mutually acceptable way without getting bogged down in the issue themselves. Chapter 2. Making a Decision. In its simplest sense, decision-making is the act of choosing between two or more strategies. In the wider process of problem-solving, decision-making includes choosing between possible options to a problem. Decisions can be made through either a user-friendly or reasoned process, or a mix of the two. Intuition. Intuition is using your gut feeling about possible courses of action. Although people talk about it as if it was a magical sense, intuition is actually a mix of past experience and your personal values. It is worth taking your intuition into account just because it reflects your finding out about life. It is, however, not always based on reality, only your perceptions, a lot of which might have begun in childhood and might not be very mature as a result. It is, for that reason, worth analyzing your suspicion carefully, particularly if you have a really strong feeling against a specific strategy, to see if you can work out why and whether the inner feeling is justified. Thinking. Thinking is using the facts and figures in front of you to make choices. Reasoning has its roots in the here and now and in simple facts. It can, however, overlook emotional elements to the choice, and in particular, concerns from the past that could influence the manner in which the choice is implemented. Intuition is a completely acceptable means of deciding, although it is normally more appropriate when the decision is of a basic nature or needs to be made rapidly. More complex decisions tend to need a more formal, systemized method, typically involving both intuition and thinking. It is essential to be careful of spontaneous responses to a situation. Applying both reason and intuitive senses. One way to do this is to apply the two aspects in turn. It's useful to begin with reason and gather facts and figures, and once you have an obvious choice, it's the turn of intuition. How do you feel about the answer? Does it feel like it's okay? If not, have another look at it and see if you can work out why not. If you're not emotionally committed to the choice you have made, you will not implement it well or successfully. Effective decision-making. Decisions really need to be capable of being carried out, whether on an individual or organizational level. You do, therefore, really need to be committed to the decision personally, and be able to convince others of its merits. An efficient decision-making process, because of this, needs to ensure that you are able to do so. What can prevent efficient decision-making? There are a number of problems that can prevent reliable decision-making. Those include 1. Insufficient info. If you do not have enough info, it can feel like you are deciding with no basis. Take a little bit of time to gather the needed information to inform your decision, even if the time scale is extremely tight. If necessary, prioritize your information gathering by recognizing which info will be most important to you. 2. Too much info. The opposite issue, but one that is seen remarkably typically, having so much contrasting information that it is unrealistic to see the wood for the trees. This is in some cases called analysis paralysis and is also used as a method to postpone organizational decision-making, with those included demanding ever more information before they can decide. This issue can often be solved by getting everyone together to choose what info is really important and why, and by setting a clear timescale for decision-making, which includes an information gathering stage. 3. Too many people. Making decisions by committee is hard. Everyone has their own views and their own values. And while it's important to know what these views are and why and how they are necessary, it could be important for a single person to take responsibility for deciding. Sometimes, any decision is better than none. 4. Vested interests. Decision-making procedures typically happen under the weight of vested interests. These beneficial interests are often not overtly expressed, but may be a vital obstruction. Simply because they aren't overtly expressed, it is hard to recognize them plainly, and for that reason address them, but it can sometimes be possible to do so by exploring them with somebody outside the process, but in a comparable position. It can also be good to explore the rational or intuitive elements with all stakeholders, typically with an external facilitator to support the process. 5. Psychological attachments. People are often very connected to the status quo. Choices tend to include the prospect of change, which lots of people find hard. 6. No emotional attachment. In some cases, it is tough to decide because you just don't care one way or the other. In this case, a structured decision-making process can typically help by determining some really masters and cons of specific actions that perhaps you had not thought about before. Tons of these issues can be gotten rid of by utilizing an organized decision-making process. This will help to minimize more complex choices down to easier steps. See how any choices are gotten to and plan choice-making to meet deadlines. Many different methods of choice-making have been developed, varying from simple rules of thumb to incredibly complex procedures. The approach used depends on the nature of the decision to be made and how complicated it is. Chapter 3. Clarifying and Information. In communication, clarification includes offering back to the speaker the vital meaning, as comprehended by the listener, of what they have just said, and therefore, checking that the listener's understanding is right and resolving any parts of confusion or misunderstanding. Explanation is necessary in many situations, particularly when what is being communicated is hard in some way. Communication can be difficult for lots of reasons. Perhaps sensitive emotions are being talked about, or you are listening to some complicated info or following guidelines. The goal of information is to ensure that the listener's understanding of what the speaker has said is right, minimizing misconception. Assure the speaker that the listener is truly fascinated by them and is trying to understand what they are saying. As an extension of showing, clarifying reassures the speaker that the listener is trying to understand the messages they are expressing. Clarifying can involve asking questions or periodically summarizing what the speaker has said. A listener can ask for explanation when they can't understand the speaker's reactions. In some cases, the messages that a speaker is trying to send can be highly intricate, involving various people, concerns, spots, and/or times. Clarifying helps you to sort these out, and also to check the speaker's concerns. Through clarification, it is possible for the speaker and the listener to make sense of these typically confused and intricate concerns. Clarifying involves genuineness on the listener's part, and it shows speakers that the listener is interested in them and in what they need to say. Some examples of non-directive, clarification-seeking questions are: I'm not rather sure I understand what you are saying. I don't feel clear about the primary issue here. When you said, what did you mean? Could you repeat? Clarifying involves non-judgmental questioning, summarizing and looking for feedback as to its precision. Clarification questions. When you are the listener in a sensitive environment, the right sort of non-directive questioning can make it possible for the speaker to define their viewpoint more totally. Asking the best question at the correct time can be crucial and includes practice. The best questions are open-ended as they give the speaker choice in how to react, although closed questions allow only extremely limited reactions. Open questions. If your role is to assist a speaker to speak about a concern, usually the most efficient questioning starts with when, where, how, or why. These questions motivate speakers to be open and go deeper into their thoughts. For instance, when did you first start feeling like this? Why do you feel this way? Closed questions. Closed questions usually generate a yes or no response and don't motivate speakers to be open and expand on their thoughts. Such questions often start with "did you?" or "were you?" For example, did you always feel like this? Were you aware of feeling this way? Standards for clarifying. Explanation is the ability we use to guarantee that we have understood the message of the speaker in a social exchange. When using explanation, follow these standards to help aid communication and understanding. Admit if you're unsure about what the speaker is actually saying. Ask for repeating. State what the speaker has said as you comprehend it and check whether this is what they truly said. Ask for particular examples. Use open, non-directive questions if proper. Ask if you have got it right and be prepared to be fixed. Summing up. As a further extension to explanation, a summary involves evaluating what has happened during the whole conversation. It is important to keep only to the important components of the discussion, and it must be given from the speaker's context, not an interpretation from the listener's perspective. The aim of a synopsis is to examine understanding, not to give clarification, to judge, to interpret, or supply solutions. Summing up should be done at the end of a discussion, though at times it may be proper midway through, as a way of accumulating different threads. At the start of a discussion, it is helpful to summarize any prior discussions or conferences, as it can help to provide focus, whilst the summary is likely to be the longest time a listener will be speaking throughout a discussion. It is important to be as succinct and simple as possible. In reflection, clarifying, and summarizing, speakers must be enabled to disagree with and correct what the listener says. They should be encouraged to show themselves again, if needed, giving the listener another chance at understanding, and to check understanding until contract is reached. Reflecting, clarifying, and summing up are the tools used by active listeners to enable them to demonstrate understanding and motivate a speaker to talk honestly. For reliable communication, it is important that the listener and speaker both have the exact same grasp of the discussion. The speaker must, for this reason, have the chance to fix the listener's understanding. Use information, reflection, and summing up to help with your social relationships. Chapter 4. The 5 Negotiation Mistakes to Stay Away From. Whether you're negotiating your income at a new job, asking for a pay raise, or overseeing a business offer, negotiation is a skill that each professional needs, but it's no easy feat. It can take a long period of time to reach an agreement no matter what you're negotiating for, and ultimately you may not even get what you want. That's why it's important to make certain you do everything the right way. Even the tiniest errors can cost you success. 1. Don't make assumptions. The key to a successful negotiation is being prepared, and that means a lot more than knowing numbers and facts. Quote, failing to prepare is preparing to struggle, Fletcher said. Quote, preparation means event and comprehending the hard data, for example, your comparables, but it also means having 360-degree awareness. That suggests that you really need to know who the choice maker is and what the other party's needs, values, hopes, and fears are, Fletcher said. It also means not assuming that anything is non-negotiable ahead of time. Quote, gather as much information as you can beforehand and be prepared to ask strong diagnostic questions to gain clarity, she said. There is rarely a clear roadmap within a negotiation. The more ready you are, Fletcher said, the better you will be able to navigate the negotiation. 2. Do not rush. Negotiations take some time, specifically if you want them to go smoothly. Put in the time to establish a very real relationship with the other party, Fletcher advised. Quote, share a little piece of personal info that indicates your openness and desire for connection, she said. Doing so can move a negotiation from an adversarial fight to an efficient discussion. And don't be afraid to build in pauses, as they can help everyone regain perspective and get rid of excessive feelings, Fletcher said. Quote, a negotiation does not need to happen all at once, she said. 3. Do not take anything personally. Fletcher noted that it can be easy to let your feelings overcome you at the time of a negotiation, especially if it's something that affects you. But look out, getting too psychological will hurt your performance, she said. Her guidance for making it through unharmed? Quote, challenge yourself to turn moment where you feel attacked and defensive into moment of interest where you can get feedback. Feeling can easily be used against you in a deal. Fletcher also said knowing your psychological triggers and knowing how to draw back when you feel things moving in the wrong direction. 4. Don't accept a bad offer. Negotiation can be a long, tiring, and demanding activity, Fletcher said. It can be easy to settle, but agreeing to a deal just to get a deal is not good no matter what side you're on. Quote, it's important to remember that a deal is not necessarily better than no offer, she said. That can be discouraging when you have invested energy and time into getting a deal done, but it is necessary to have that clarity. Fletcher said you should understand entering into the negotiation exactly what you want to give up and what you aren't. Ask yourself, what does success look like? At what point am I comfortable walking away? Eventually, not making a deal needs to always be a choice. 5. Don't over-negotiate. If you are fortunate enough to have the upper hand throughout the negotiation, don't take advantage of it way too much, Fletcher said. Think of the effects of over-negotiating ahead of time, she said. You might get what you want, but at what price? Quote, don't put yourself in a position where you can't return to a relationship because you over-leveraged, Fletcher said. Recognize that ideally, this is a relationship and a discussion that will continue in time. What are some examples of negotiating? Though there's no such thing as a foolproof negotiation approach, some strategies are better than others. Here are several of examples of good negotiation techniques. Understanding how to close the deal while adding value. Rather than selling yourself short and just taking whatever deal you can get, try to add value to the offer. For example, if you are selling cable television packages, you might be happy just to get someone to agree to subscribe to the service. However, a seasoned negotiator will go above and beyond by offering premium channels, upgraded equipment, and more. Moreover, these add-ons will be better received if you can include a discount that makes the client feel like they are getting more for their cash. Down-talking the service or product. If you include a lot of negatives in your settlements, you are going to frighten consumers away. An example would be the following. If you are selling cable television packages, and a consumer makes a comment that the price is much higher than expected, the absolute worst thing you can do is agree with them. If a client is giving you their concentrated attention, they likely want you to convince them to buy your service and products. Though by agreeing that it costs too much, you are just affirming that the service is not worth the cash. On the other hand, if you counter this argument with something along the lines of, "It could look like a lot, but with all of the channels you're getting, we're basically losing cash," or, "Yes, some customers say that, but we do provide a bulk discount rate that makes it a lot more budget-friendly than it seems," you'll be far more likely to secure the offer. Chapter 5. Control the negotiation before it starts. Countless books and articles give us guidance that can help deal makers keep from errors at the bargaining table. Nevertheless, some of the costliest mistakes take place before mediators even take a seat to talk about the essence of the offer. That is simply because people fall victim to an apparently sensible, but ultimately malfunctioning, assumption about deal-making. Negotiators often take it for granted that if they bring a lot of value to the table and have adequate leverage, they will have the ability to strike a great deal. While those things are certainly essential, many other elements impact where each party ends up. Here I make use of my experience advising scores of businesses on offers worth millions or billions of dollars to present 4 elements that can have a remarkable impact on negotiation outcomes. In every case, I provide guidance on what mediators should do before either side starts making offers or counter-offers. 1. Negotiate process prior to compound. Several years ago, 2 co-founders of a tech venture walked into a meeting with the CEO of a Fortune 100 company who had consented to invest $10 million with them. A week earlier, the parties had hammered out the financial investment amount and valuation, so the meeting was supposed to be celebratory more than anything else. When the co-founders went into the room, they were amazed to see a group of lawyers and bankers. The CEO was there too, but it quickly became clear that he was not going to actively participate. As fast as the co-founders took a seat, the lenders on the other side started to renegotiate the deal. The $10 million financial investment was still on the table, yet now they demanded a much lower evaluation. Simply put, the co-founders would need to forfeit substantially more equity. Their attempts to clarify that a contract had already been reached were without results. What was going on? Had the co-founders misconstrued the level of commitment in the prior meeting? Had they overlooked steps associated with settling the deal? Had the CEO intended to renege all along? Or had his team persuaded him that the deal could be sweetened? Upset and confused, the co-founders rapidly evaluated their choices. Accepting the new offer would hurt financially and emotionally, but they'd get the $10 million in needed funds. Meanwhile, doing so would considerably underestimate what they brought to the table. They decided to walk out without a deal. Right before they left, they emphasized their strong desire to do a deal on the preliminary terms and explained that this referred principle and also economics. Within hours, they were on an aircraft, not knowing what would happen. Some days later, the CEO called and accepted the original offer. The gutsy move worked out for the co-founders, but it would have been better not to let things go wrong in the first place. Their error was a common one, focusing way too much on the substance of the offer and insufficient on the process. Compound is the terms that make up the last agreement. Process is how you are going to get from where you are today to that contract. My guidance to deal makers? Negotiate the process before any substance. That's my rule. Consider another circumstance. You have actually been negotiating with a person for months. You have a few final concessions that you've been holding back. They're pricey but worth making if it will close the deal. With the finish line in sight, you make the concessions, and the opposite side responds, "This is great. I appreciate your versatility on these issues. Let me share this with my boss to see what she thinks. Sadly for you, you had no clue your counterpart even had a boss. You thought he was the decision maker. The settlements are obviously not over, and you have nothing left to give. The more clarity and dedication you have regarding the prospects, the less likely you are to make mistakes on substance. Negotiating process entails discussing and influencing a variety of aspects that will affect the result of the offer. Ask the other party, how much time does your firm really need to close the deal? Who has to be on board? What aspects might slow down or accelerate the process? Are there essential turning points or dates we should know? Remember to learn basic things such as, who will be in the meeting tomorrow? What will the agenda be? Since we are not going to talk about the problems of importance to us in the next meeting, when will we resolve them? Of course, you cannot always get clear answers to every question at the start, and at times it is premature to ask certain questions, but you should seek to clarify and reach arrangement on as many process elements as possible, and as early as is appropriate, to stay away from discovering substance later. 2. Normalize the process. An entrepreneur who owns several manufacturing facilities in Asia once told me that he no longer does business with businesses from the West unless their top supervisors want to first fly into his city to meet him. My initial thoughts were, is this about ego? Is it about building relationships? Is it a cultural standard or routine of some sort? Actually, none of those had anything to do with his prerequisite to signing a contract. Here is how he clarified it to me. Till they have flown into my city, and after that driven to our factory, which is located 20 kilometers from the airport but takes almost 3 hours to reach, until they have experienced that, they just do not understand how things work around here. And if they do not comprehend, we run into serious problems. Because the first time there is a holdup or interruption, or if we need to renegotiate something, they will immediately presume we're either inexperienced or taking from them. And when they've seen how things actually work, we can have a more efficient relationship. Unless company partners comprehend what is normal in a given framework or culture, they are very likely to misconstrue or overreact to unfavorable events. The same is true in negotiations of all kinds. It is very important to normalize the process. If you have ever been associated with an awful dispute that entered into mediation, you might have seen this in action. When a very good arbitrator sits down with parties who are in a bitter disagreement, she might say something like, "You think you hate each other today? I can guarantee you about 3 days into this process, you're going to dislike each other a lot more. And when that happens, I want you to recall something. That's typical." If the arbitrator doesn't give this caution, the parties are a lot more likely to abandon the process when emotions increase and things seem to be breaking down. However, if she explains at the beginning that it is typical for things to get worse before they get much better, the parties are more likely to keep at it. By stabilizing the process, she efficiently manages their expectations. The exact same concept certainly applies to any negotiation where there's a danger that things will not go perfectly efficiently. If you expect delays or interruptions on your side, tell your counterparts. That allows you to shape how they will interpret an unfavorable event, should one occur, and to guarantee that they don't overweight its importance. You're going to have a much harder time attempting to impact their perceptions or win back their trust after something fails that they did not expect. Normalizing the process involves talking about, in advance, any elements that might cause the opposite side to question your intents or ability, or to doubt the probability of a successful result. You may explain common barriers that need to be gotten rid of, moment at the time of the process when it prevails for parties to feel restless or downhearted, events that might delay progress, and the distinction between disturbances that are commonplace and simple to deal with, and ones that are more serious. Motivate the other side to do the exact same for you. People typically are reluctant to go over what may go wrong because they're concentrated on providing themselves and the merits of the deal in the best possible light. That is especially true in certain societies and in contexts where competition is fierce. Your equivalent might be thinking, why should I talk about issues if my competitors are pretending things will be great? That's reasonable. If other parties think that pointing out a potential disruption could cost them the business, or that you will use it as a lever to extract greater concessions, they are not likely to be honest. To encourage people to be open about problems, make it safe for them. Clarify that you are experienced enough to know that every offer and relationship is very likely to encounter troubles and disturbances, and that you want to discover more about the particular risk factors that might contribute in this case. And if you can indicate or commit to having no intent of holding those aspects against them, you have a much better chance of reaching an understanding that works for both sides. 3. Map out the negotiation space. Some years ago, a client of mine was preparing to sell his stake in a business that was jointly owned by 4 beings. The owners had been squabbling for several years. It was clear that the asset would really need to be combined under one party, or maybe 2 who could get along. It was also clear that nobody wanted to sell. Yet there was little choice in the matter, just because one of the owners, Business X, was a much bigger company with the power and the clout to push people out. It announced that it would purchase out the other 3. My client wanted to wait until Company X had bought out the other 2 owners before negotiating the sale of his shares. He figured that by being the last piece of the puzzle, he would have the ability to claim more money. When we met each other to discuss his strategy, I asked him to step back and plan out the negotiation space. This includes every party that can affect the negotiation, together with any party that will be impacted by the negotiation. In my experience, a technique that makes perfect sense when you're thinking bilaterally, that is, about the relationship between any 2 parties in the negotiation, can all of a sudden become inadequate and even disastrous when you take a multilateral perspective. I motivated my client to examine the interests, restrictions, options, and perspective of all of the appropriate parties. One of the important things we looked at was how much equity each party had and how much of the board everyone controlled. We then fixated on the interests of each company. What exactly are their interests in this offer? How would you rank their top priorities? The 4 parties had known one another a very long time, and my client did not have any trouble identifying what mattered most to each. Company X, for example, was concerned about 3 things, and its top priorities were as follows. 1. Track record. It didn't want ties with any company that could hurt its credibility. 2. Control. It really wanted ownership only in businesses where it had a majority of board seats. And 3. Money. It would want to pay as low as possible, but this was not as huge a concern as track record and control. After delving into the perspectives of all parties, we uncovered another important bit of info. Company A was the least fascinated by selling and was already arguing that could drag things out. When we put all of these specifics together, it ended up being clear that the last piece of the puzzle strategy would be risky. Why? For Company X, control was a higher top priority than cash. To get control, it needed to purchase either my client or Company A. As soon as it made either purchase, it would control more than 50% of the board seats, and thus the company, for most decisions. Because of this, if my client were the last to sell, he would be negotiating with Company X after it had control. At that time, my client would be able to make money only for his 1/6 share of the firm's equity. But if he were to sell first, at a time when Business A was refusing to sell and was making things hard for Business X, he could monetize 2 assets, his shares and his board seat. In other words, the last party to negotiate would have the least leverage and minimal chances to monetize its assets. In reality, you'll never ever have as complete a picture as you'd like, but you put yourself at more drawback if you focus too narrowly on the party on the other side of the table. You have to examine the perspective of all of the parties that can influence or are impacted by the offer. Who has the capability to influence the individual on the other side of the table? How might the technique or actions of other parties change your alternatives for better or even worse? How does the deal impact the interests of those that aren't at the table? How will this negotiation impact your leverage with future negotiation partners? If multiple parties are associated with the offer, does it make sense to negotiate with them all at once or in sequence, together or separately? Your analysis may suggest a significant change of strategy, that you should talk with a much different party first, delay the offer, or speed it up, bring others into the room, expand or contract the scope of the offer, etc. 4. Control the frame. The result of a negotiation depends a great deal on each side's leverage. The better your outside alternatives are and the more ways you have to reward or persuade the opposite side, the more likely you are to accomplish your objectives. However, the psychology of the offer can be just as crucial. In my experience, the frame or psychological lens through which the parties see the negotiation has a substantial effect on where they wind up. Are the parties treating the interaction as a problem-solving exercise or as a battle to be won? Are they looking at it as a meeting of equals, or do they view an important difference in status? Are they fixated on the long term or the short term? Are concessions expected, or are they seen as signs of weakness? Reliable mediators will try to control or change the frame early in the process, preferably before the substance of the deal is even discussed. Here are 3 components of framing that mediators would be wise to consider. Value versus cost. I have worked with many innovation firms whose innovative products offer tremendous value for consumers but are priced substantially higher than what their competitors are charging, or what customers are paying for their traditional systems. While the high price is justified by the value proposition, salespeople usually face instant resistance when a prospective consumer learns that the cost will be 5 or 10 times the amount he's currently paying. Too frequently, the sales representative will hear something like, "You are charging 5 times what others charge. Nobody pays that much for this type of thing." One of the most typical mistakes salespeople make in those situations, without even realizing it, is to say sorry for having a high cost. They do this when they say, "I understand it's costly, but," or when they quickly signify a determination to change the cost. My advice? Always validate your offer, but never ever say sorry for it. When you apologize, you signal that even you do not think the price is appropriate, and you give the opposite side license to bargain. The whole frame of the negotiation ends up being about cost, when what you really want to go over is value. A much better reaction would be, what you are probably asking is, how is it that despite a higher price, we still have a long and growing list of customers? We both know that no one will pay more for something than it deserves, so let's talk about the value we bring so that you can choose what's best for you. In settlements of all kinds, the faster you can shift the conversation away from the cost to your counterpart and fixate on the value you bring to the table, the more likely it is that you will be able to monetize that value. Your options versus theirs. Research and experience suggest that people who walk into a deal consumed by the question, "What will happen to me if there is no offer?" become worse outcomes than the ones who fixate on, "What would happen to the opposite side if there is no offer?" When you are extremely concerned with your own options, and especially when your outside options are weak, you think concerning, "What will it take at a minimum to get them to say yes?" And once you make the deal about what happens to them if there's no offer, you move the frame to the unique value you offer, and it ends up being easier to validate why you are worthy of a good deal. Equality versus dominance. Not so long ago, I was seeking advice from on a tactical handle, which our side was a little, early-stage company and the other was a very large international. One of the most important things we did throughout the process, and especially at the outset, was make sure the difference in company size did not frame the negotiation. I told our team, "These folks talk with 2 sorts of businesses, those they consider their equates to, and those they think should feel fortunate just to be at the table with them. And they treat the 2 kinds differently, regardless of what they take to the table. Throughout the years, I have seen many big organizations impose demands on their perceived inferiors that they'd never ever require from those they considered equals. In this negotiation, I wanted to make sure our counterpart treated us like equals. To keep the supremacy frame from taking hold, we began forming expectations and perceptions at the very start, before we even considered the economics of the offer. This is an example. At any time, our equivalent made a procedural need, nevertheless little, that we felt they would not have made from an equal. We respectfully pushed all the way back on it. Whenever they included an arrangement in the term sheet that seemed one-sided, even if it wouldn't have been a costly concession, we redrafted it to be symmetrical. And throughout the negotiation, we ensured they understood that though our firm was much littler, we were equals in this negotiation because of the tremendous value we offered. While I am not an advocate of nitpicking on minor concerns, in this case we did so intentionally to help set the right frame. Mediators can form the frame in many other ways and on many other dimensions. At the very least, you want to guarantee that the psychological lens that takes hold respects the value you take to the table. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu posits that each war is won or lost before it even begins. There is truth to this belief in most tactical interactions. While it would be risky for negotiators to minimize the importance of thoroughly managing the substance of a deal, they should strive to avoid the mistakes that can occur before anybody has even created an offer. By focusing on the 4 factors discussed here, you increase your chances of creating more productive interactions and attaining more profitable outcomes. This has been Negotiating. Negotiation Mistakes and Mediation Skills for Beginners. Written by Tom Hendricks. Narrated by Doug Green. Negotiating. Bargaining Methods and Essential Negotiation Skills. Written by Tom Hendricks. Narrated by Doug Green. Chapter 1. Vital Negotiation Abilities. When do you really need strong negotiation skills? In other words, each day. Whether you're working out the details of a multi-million-dollar business offer, designating obligations among your project team, or just bargaining over where to order takeout, you're negotiating. And the better you do it, the more likely you'll be happy with the result. What's more, if you use your negotiation skills really well, the people you are negotiating with will be happy also. What is negotiation? Negotiation includes 2 or more people finding an appropriate resolution to a shared issue. Effective mediators control the process and come away with a result they're gratified with, whether or not they have made compromises along the way. Negotiation isn't limited to big decisions. When you're working with others, much of your time is spent negotiating, even if it's just deciding whose turn it is to collect the coffees. For projects to be effective, roles, strategies, targets, and due dates all need to be concurred, ideally to everyone's fulfillment. And there are also times when a very obvious negotiation process is occurring, like setting payment terms with a customer, or concurring the agreement details for a new job. So, what are the abilities you really need to negotiate well? Do your homework. Whatever technique you require to the settlements themselves, preparation is key. Common sense should tell you how much detail to get into. Showing up with reams of documents to discuss a team member's request for time off would likely trigger amusement, discouragement, or resentment. Equally, having no hard information to hand at a dilemma board meeting would probably trigger your track record serious damage. To help you get your preparation right, here are 8 elements to consider in advance. Objectives. What are you trying to accomplish at the time of the negotiation? And what do you think the other person's goals will be? Trades. What might you be able to request and what would you be prepared to give away? Alternatives. If you actually can't attain your objectives, what would be your best alternative to a worked-out contract? BATNA. Your position will be more secure if you have some options, so it's worth putting plenty of effort into resolving this point. Relationships. How have negotiations opted for this individual in the past? Just as importantly, what sort of relationship do you want with them in the future? Expected results. What precedents have been set? Based on those and on any other proof you have, what appears to be the most likely result of this negotiation? Effects. Is this a huge one-off deal or one of many smaller negotiations? What do you and the other party stand to gain or lose? Power. Who holds the power here? How might this affect the negotiation process? Solutions. Considering all those points, what do you now consider to be a reasonable outcome, one that you can put forward with confidence? Choose your negotiation style. Lots of people assume that there's just one flawless style of negotiation that we should all be going for. Actually, there are some approaches to select from. It's important to differ your style to suit the topic and significance of each negotiation you enter into. Think about what you're trying to accomplish, how crucial overall success is, and how willing you are to compromise. Apart from this, bear in mind how much you need to maintain a continuous relationship with the others included. Negotiate. With your preparations complete, it is time to have the vital discussion. From the moment you begin, keep your end goal securely in mind. If the conversation goes to prepare, what will you have accomplished, and how will the different parties feel about it? That should also help you prepare for how the next few minutes will go. Negotiating can be an emotional process. Use these 6 steps of resolution to ease any tensions and to minimize the risk of negotiations breaking down. You are going to also increase your chances of reaching a rewarding outcome. The 6 steps are: treat the other individual with respect, separate the person from the problem, understand their point of view, listen first, talk second, stay with the facts, explore options together. If you're going to be dealing with this person again in the future, you will both want to be open and fair. Try to attain a win-win outcome by being as creative as you can in all parts of the settlements. For example, you could expand the pie, extending what is on offer to accommodate both parties. Suggest alternative options, exploring different possibilities that might work for everyone. Trade favors, each of you agreeing to honor particular top priorities for the other side. Offer settlement, recognizing where sacrifices have been made. Strategies like these can even boost your relationship with the other party and build your professional track record. Harder approaches, on the other hand, may harm your chances of future success. Nevertheless, know that the other party may have no such scruples, particularly if they do not expect to deal with you again. They could choose to play hardball, so you will really need to be prepared. Somebody taking this method will likely kick things off with an opening offer. They will be expecting to negotiate, but they'll also have a clear target in mind, and they will have a resistance point where their versatility ends. You'll need to spend a pretty big part of the discussion finding out their target and their resistance point so you can work out efficiently. You'll also really need to know where you stand on these 2 concerns yourself. This is the distributive style of negotiation commonly used when purchasing or selling realty, for example. You're not likely to have more contact with the other party later, so you can go all out for what you want without fear of embarrassment or reprisal. But think carefully about taking this method with a person at work. You never ever know when your courses could cross again. Boost your chances. No matter how ready you are, or how thoroughly you follow your chosen method, you'll need to make use of a range of people abilities to attain the results you want. It's important to be assertive in negotiations, but remember to listen too, and try to strike a balance between emotion and logic, heart and head. Whatever you are negotiating, confidence is crucial. If yours is low, focus on building a strong relationship with the other individuals rather than on giving a dazzling efficiency. Anyone who you are dealing with, you'll likely get a much better result if you can gain their trust, and if they feel they can trust you in return. Keep on track in spite of any nerves by staying away from the most common errors of negotiation and by understanding the do's and don'ts of encouraging. Understanding what to keep away from is typically just as essential as recalling the best practices to follow. Chapter 2. More Negotiation Tips. When we advise our clients on settlements, we often ask them how they intend to formulate a deal strategy. Most respond that they'll do some planning before engaging with their equivalents, for instance, by identifying each side's best option to a negotiated arrangement, BATNA, or by researching the other party's crucial interests. But past that, they feel restricted in how well they can prepare. What we hear frequently is, it depends upon what the opposite side does. Fair enough. For most routine negotiations, a reactive approach suffices. When the stakes are low, proficient arbitrators can pivot with relative ease from one tactic to another as the opposite side makes moves, and often that's enough to guarantee that the last deal fully catches value for them. However, from time to time, deal-makers find themselves in complex negotiations with higher stakes. In those circumstances, they require a lot more robust technique. Just like business, political, and military leaders, mediators really need a strategic framework that lights up the essential choices they should make to attain their supreme goals. Mediators should start developing them well before the initiation of talks, but the process is vibrant and iterative and should continue till the final offer is tattooed, and in many cases beyond. With well-thought-out strategies, mediators can reduce the desire to respond to counterparts or to make preemptive moves that are based upon fears about the opposite side's intents. They'll have the ability to prepare for the absolute worst, but not trigger it, and to recognize the actions most likely to have a considerable effect on offer results. Here are the key tactical principles mediators should actually apply to their next complex deal. Rethink equivalence. Most people tend to chase after handle the obvious parties. If we're sellers, we search for a buyer. If we are customers, we search for a loan provider. However, we usually neglect many others in the ecosystem surrounding the negotiation: our competitors, suppliers, and customers, and their competitors, providers, and clients. We need a technique that encompasses all of the parties that can and will help us satisfy our objectives. To create one, negotiators should answer the following questions. What business results do we seek through this negotiation? Who appreciates those results? Who can do something to bring about those results? How can we engage, directly or indirectly, with parties that share some of our interest in accomplishing those outcomes? Consider how the holder of essential patents needed to play movies and music on DVDs tried to prevent low-priced makers in China from infringing on its copyright and competing unjustly with its properly certified partners. Initially, it tried to talk with those makers, but for the most part it was just overlooked. And even when the Chinese makers were effectively challenged and subjected to a legal process, they would just close shop and then reopen under a much different name. Working backward from the wanted result, stopping sales of infringing products in substantial markets, the patent holder realized that though it could not dissuade producers from making unlicensed DVD players, it could convince large importers and suppliers to stop buying and selling those products. By helping the importers and suppliers recognize the violation and copyright problems, the patent owner got them on the exact same side of what would otherwise have been a high uphill negotiation with the unauthorized makers. Analyze equivalence constituencies. In high-stakes settlements, deal-makers tend to discuss how much power and leverage the other side has, what the other side will or will not agree to, and how to influence its conduct. While watching counterparts as though they were one monolithic entity is practical, that attitude regularly causes analytical and tactical mistakes. In the realm of worldwide diplomacy, arbitrators have typically been somewhat more attuned to thinking about how to influence multiple constituencies when creating deals, be it with the Taliban or the old Soviet Union. For example, A customer may perceive itself to be at a drawback in a negotiation with a crucial provider because it represents only a small piece of that provider's overall business. A closer look, however, may expose that it represents a fairly big percentage of the business at one of that provider's plants or in a specific geographical market for a specific system. While the provider's corporate leaders may view the consumer as insignificant, the plant manager or unit head who depends on it would see it as very important. A corporation isn't one consistent company. It's a federation of businesses. Usually, profits and losses are assessed not only at the business level, but by system, geography, item, and plant. The authority to work out agreements is generally, though not always, handed over accordingly. Carefully parsing an equivalent's constituencies is important to understanding negotiation leverage. The supply chain team at a large hospitality and entertainment company took that lesson to heart in settlements with major beverage suppliers. The team members acknowledged that bargaining with their sales equivalents over volume discounts would attain limited value. It was only by broadening the discussion well past discounts and the province of sales that they learned that other stakeholders within their providers had a lot more value to contribute. There were also opportunities to discuss promotional sponsorships at the entertainment company's locations and events, the strong relationships the drink providers had with performers who could fill those venues, marketing events that the suppliers could host at the home entertainment company's hospitality properties, and more. Reassess the deal's scope. The huge majority of arbitrators take the fundamental scope of a deal as a given. They may consider a limited set of choices, for instance, much shorter versus longer-term offers, but by and large, their methods are guided by a contrast between their BATNA and how near some preferred result they think they can get. As the home entertainment company's example illustrates, though, there are typically considerable chances to change the scope of settlements and attain better results. Consider a healthcare firm that was seeking to renegotiate the terms of a major supply contract with a pharmaceutical company. The healthcare firm needed a lot more manufacturing capacity from a major plant owned and operated by the pharma company. The pharma company was loath to offer more capability than the original contract defined because it anticipated needing to make more of its own items at the same facility in the future. Many creative options were explored, and that includes shared capital investments to increase the plant's performance and output, transformed monetary terms, and the possibility of a plant-within-a-plant running model. Nevertheless, no resolution appeared to meet both sides' needs. However, when the scope of the negotiation was increased past changing the existing agreement, and both sides stepped back to reassess and share information on their respective international operations, including prepare for building new plants and growth goals and associated capital investment needs, they had the ability to reach an agreement. The new agreement rebalanced production and supply across several plants and provided significantly more value to both parties. The mediators didn't expand just the pie, they broadened the entire menu. Or take the monetary services business that was seeking to restore an agreement with a firm that owned proprietary data assets and was demanding a large price boost. An analysis of the yearly report and revenues calls of the data company revealed that it was concentrated on increasing earnings from other services and products, ones the financial services company was buying from some other suppliers. While some of those existing suppliers were highly valued partners, and it did not make a lot of sense to ponder moving business from them, in other cases, the monetary firm could give the information company an increase in business in the areas it wanted to build. The company's negotiating team offered to do that, but only if the service provider agreed to more reasonable terms on the data it took pleasure in a de facto monopoly on. It's worth keeping in mind how counterintuitive this approach is. When faced with opposing parties who seem to have more leverage, the natural propensity is to search for ways to weaken that leverage, to find walkaway alternatives and problem threats. Such efforts usually lose or weaken offer success, The lesson here is to offer the opposite side new chances, rather than focusing just on the needs that only it can meet for you. At times, the right strategy is even to decrease the scope of the offer. A classic piece of negotiation advice is to carefully assess and try to improve your BATNA. The issue is, in most high-stakes negotiations, there's really no practical alternative to some handle the other party. Digging much deeper into BATNA analysis is crucial in such scenarios. The key isn't to simply consider wholesale alternatives to any agreement with a powerful counterpart, but rather to check out alternatives to some aspects of what you're seeking through that deal. Here's how that approach worked for a health gadget company that felt powerless in its negotiations with a distributor that controlled a crucial regional market. No other supplier had equivalent coverage in the region. After considering expanding the scope of the deal, the device maker instead decided to narrow it. It recognized alternative distribution channels for some of its products in some segments of the local market. Bringing its items to market with a portfolio of tinier suppliers would have been prohibitively complex and would have increased expenses and lowered revenue. But as soon as the gadget maker had described a strategy to narrow the scope of the deal with the incumbent distributor, the negotiations moved to a significantly more even footing. As a matter of fact, the supplier stopped making demands and threats and ended up going to engage in a collective process. The two sides jointly evaluated where it was specifically costly for the supplier to service the device maker, business the distributor was actually happy to give up, and where it would have been most challenging for the device maker to move to alternative suppliers. The narrower scope made the supplier willing to reduce some of its requirements, meant to cover the expenses of dispersing low-margin items in expensive-to-service sections. For the gadget maker, the cost of consenting to much of what the distributor was requesting dropped considerably. Rethink the nature of leverage. All too often, deal makers conflate negotiation power with a strong BATNA and the concomitant ability to hurt the other party. Basically, the message they send is, "We do not really need a deal with you, and you really need to handle us, so we get to dictate the terms." Such a mindset results in pressure methods. It also makes arbitrators who lack attractive walkaway alternatives conclude that they have no power, which in turn causes mistakes and baseless concessions. Additionally, their sense of powerlessness can breed fear and resentment, negative feelings that hinder creative thinking about potential avenues to an optimum outcome. The solution is to think beyond walkaway options and consider multiple sources of not only forcible leverage but also positive leverage. By positive leverage, we mean things mediators can uniquely offer to make the opposite side desire a deal instead of fear the lack of one. Most innovation companies have IP groups that try to convince customer electronic devices companies such as Apple, Sony, and LG to pay for licenses. The negotiation of IP rights in this market is dauntingly intricate. Patent violation is prevalent, however typically unintentional. Lawful efforts to gather royalties are vastly complicated by the popular phenomenon of patent trolls. Subsequently, most IP licensing teams struggle to move up in the line for basic contemplation by under-resourced in-licensing teams who feel besieged by all of the parties saying the right to royalties and offering little in return other than an agreement not to take legal action against. The IP licensing team at one popular tech firm had a strong claims portfolio and engaging market information about the rights that other firms were infringing. The team tried to be creative and flexible, offering to blend payments for past infringement, ongoing royalties, and cross-licenses. Yet its BATNA, filing lawsuits against infringers that ignored it, wasn't strong, because the ability to enforce patent rights and gather damages had been hampered recently in a lot of jurisdictions all over the world. The firm didn't have a particularly good performance history in court either. To different consumer electronic devices businesses, it made sense to rebuff the team's demands, and so they did. By researching the business models and methods of the electronic devices companies, the team had the ability to identify which of its firm's patented innovations were complementary to essential efforts at each target licensee. Working with the firm's tech and sales departments, the team then defined value propositions demonstrating each target licensee how it could use the firm's IP to generate new items or revenue streams. One electronic devices company, for instance, could leverage the tech firm's sound and imaging IP in elder care offerings, and another could boost its device with the firm's virtual reality expertise. Those opportunities made it rewarding for the electronics companies to engage in significant settlements with the team. Though this method required a lot of time and effort, the benefit was well worth it. Try to find links across negotiations. Most arbitrators focus exclusively on making the most of the value of the offer at hand. In doing so, they typically undermine the success of future negotiations, their own and those of their colleagues. A tactical method requires thinking about success past the current offer and, in particular, how the precedents it sets will produce anchors and shape dynamics in future settlements. After all, except with pure sales and purchases of assets, most high-stakes business negotiations are repeat transactions carried out in the context of long-term relationships. Examining links across multiple settlements can unearth hidden forms of leverage. Consider the case of a worldwide semiconductor company that felt continually squeezed by unreasonable price boosts from OEM part providers. A major issue was that settlements over preliminary licensing, or co-development of innovation for new products, were carried out by one group, whereas subsequent contract negotiations with the exact same suppliers, but taking place years later, were dealt with by another group, with reasonably little coordination between the two. Meanwhile, negotiations with those providers and other third parties for repair and maintenance services and extra parts were managed by yet another group, and all three sorts of negotiations occurred on different timetables. By looking at these separate but associated settlements holistically, the semiconductor company had the ability to change the power dynamics. Teams negotiating supply agreements acknowledged that they had little choice but to accept an incumbent supplier's prices and terms, but had the ability to point to upcoming product introductions and alert that irrational positions held now would probably exclude providers from being considered for next-generation items and all associated downstream earnings. They also shared data about maintenance and repair income streams and their growing capability to reroute such business to partners who demonstrated reasonableness and good faith. Threats and promises about future business had been made in the past by the company's mediators, but they weren't particular and lacked reliability. Now the advantages of increased cooperation and the potential loss of opportunities were tangible to providers and hence persuasive. Consider the impact of timing and sequencing. Many individuals seek to accelerate or slow down settlements to put pressure on the other side and extract concessions. But pressure tactics typically backfire. Careful contemplation of how the opposite side is very likely to respond should guide when to speed up, slow down, or stop briefly a deal. Some years ago, a little innovation company was in settlements to restore a very critical handle and internet behemoth. The little company depended a lot on the income the offer produced, and the thought of going without it for even a short time was frightening. Seeking to pressure the little firm, the behemoth revealed little seriousness to finish the deal and signaled that it was not sure the agreement was definitely worth restoring. That ended up being a major miscalculation. Acknowledging that it could do little to get the other side to go much faster, the little company's negotiation team decided to utilize the time to build support within the firm's environment of clients and business partners for the possibility of partnering with one of the Leviathan's huge rivals instead. That time was well spent, as such an alternative went from unimaginable to conceivable to credible. The smaller firm's leverage grew. In the end, the agreement with the Leviathan was renewed for a 9-figure value that represented a nearly 5-fold boost over the expiring deal. While the passage of time did make the small firm worried about its dwindling money reserves, it also gave it the opportunity to significantly modify the landscape in which the negotiation occurred. Choreographing the sequence in which you resolve concerns or engage different players is also crucial. Handling some concerns could reset the stakes or reframe the rest of the negotiation. A great example of tactically reconsidering sequence in a deal comes from the oil and gas industry. As part of a joint endeavor deal with a national oil company, one big multinational had agreed that if a certain competitor wanted to add itself to the deal later, it could do so by paying its share of the capital plus interest for the time it had not participated. Some years later, that second international indeed triggered its choice and tried to open settlements on the rate of interest. Instead of talking about how many points above or below LIBOR would be appropriate, the international decided to return to the oil company and negotiate what farther terms should apply to the modified deal. The multinational proposed the concept that a later entrant shouldn't earn a higher rate of return than the original partners, who had taken a greater risk before the project had proved its value. The oil company easily agreed. With that matter settled, the international turned to the new partner-to-be and showed, using the just recently examined books for the joint endeavor, that the interest owed by an incoming partner would have to be 60% a year, nothing like LIBOR. After some initial shock, the incoming partner concurred. 5 questions can help negotiators strategically manage timing and sequencing. What changes in the external marketplace might increase or reduce the value or significance of the offer for each party? To what extent can we use additional time to reinforce our walkaway options? To what level can the opposite side use added time to enhance its walkaway alternatives? How might deals negotiated with other parties influence the scope of the negotiation or create precedents that influence the way we solve crucial problems? What events or changes in the external marketplace might adversely influence the strength of our walkaway alternatives and the other sides, or create mutually helpful opportunities? Be creative about the process and framing. When approaching a high-stakes deal with a powerful equivalent, many arbitrators argument whether to start by releasing their own proposition or by asking the other side to do so. They also often wonder whether they are supposed to project strength by requesting for aggressive terms in their first offer or counteroffer, or signal a desire for a win-win outcome through more balanced and reasonable terms. But such binary thinking blinds us to the number of ways we may form the negotiation process to minimize risk and increase the likelihood of a great outcome. Let's take a look at a worldwide healthcare company that depended upon a single supplier to make one of its biggest revenue-generating products. The provider held many patents necessary to the manufacturing process, so changing to a much different one would have taken years and significant investments in redesign. But for many years, the supplier had been unwilling to collaborate on improving quality and making effectiveness. As the contract with it neared expiration, the healthcare company pondered how to open the negotiation for a renewal. Should it need huge price decreases and other improvements? Or should it start with more reasonable terms and hope that the provider reacted in kind? After much dispute about the compromises, the healthcare company developed a third method. Rather than starting by sending out a preliminary term sheet, it welcomed the supplier to a pre-negotiation summit, a joint discussion of what had worked well and what hadn't for each side under the prior agreement, and of how the market and each side's business objectives had changed. That was deemed a low-risk move. The provider might well decrease the offer, but so what? The healthcare company's negotiation team would then simply revert to sending out an opening term sheet. To the surprise of some on the team, the provider accepted the invite. During the summit, the healthcare company's team shared an analysis of the economics and progressing market position of the company's product. It revealed that unless the product's price fell substantially, new competitive offerings would take significant market share away from it. That would reduce not only the healthcare company's income, but also the provider's. The analysis triggered an animated discussion focused not on bargaining, but on joint problem solving. That, in turn, resulted in thinking about how to restructure the way the firms work together, and to a set of concepts for negotiating business terms in the new contract, which includes a framework for sharing risks and benefits. The ultimate deal saved the maker tens of millions of dollars, but was seen by the supplier as more favorable than the earlier agreement. Both sides concurred that a standard offer-counteroffer negotiation process would at best have yielded a considerably less important offer for both and could easily have led to no deal at all. High-stakes settlements tend to produce a lot of anxiety. This leads deal-makers to focus on perceived threats instead of recognize all possible forms of leverage and think expansively about alternatives. When that happens, negotiators are more likely to make poor tactical choices, either giving into pressure from the opposite side or inadvertently causing their own worst fears to come to pass. A strategic negotiation method includes more than choosing a cooperative or competitive posture, and thinking in such binary terms is generally disadvantageous. Examining connections between one negotiation and others with the same party over time, and even with other parties, taking a pretty hard look at whether they're negotiating about the right things, and concentrating on when and how to most successfully engage with the other side, will unlock much more value for deal makers. Chapter 3. The 10 Hard Bargaining Methods to Look Out For in a Settlement. Some negotiators appear to believe that hard bargaining methods are the key to success. They turn to threats, extreme needs, and even unethical conduct to try to get the upper hand in a deal. In fact, arbitrators who draw on hard bargaining methods in negotiation are normally betraying a lack of comprehending about the gains that can be accomplished in most business negotiations. When mediators turn to hard bargaining tactics, they communicate that they see negotiation as a win-lose business. A little percentage of business negotiations that concern only one problem, such as cost, can certainly be deemed win-lose negotiations or distributive settlements. Much more typically, though, business settlements include several problems. Subsequently, these so-called integrative settlements give parties the potential to produce win-win results or equally beneficial arrangements. Organization negotiators can negotiate by brainstorming creative solutions, determining differences in preferences that can be ripe for trade-offs, and building trust. Sadly, when parties turn to hard bargaining tactics in settlements with integrative potential, they run the risk of missing out on these advantages. Because mediators tend to react in the way they are treated, one party's negotiation hardball strategies can create a vicious circle of threats, needs, and other hardball methods. That pattern can create a hard bargaining negotiation that easily degrades into impasse, distrust, or a deal that is subpar for everybody involved. 10 Common Hard Bargaining Techniques and Negotiation Skills. To prevent your negotiation from breaking down into hard bargaining techniques, you first need to make a strong commitment not to participate in these techniques yourself. Remember that there are typically better ways of meeting your goals, like building trust, asking a ton of questions, and exploring distinctions. Next, you really need to get ready for your equivalence hard bargaining techniques. To do so, you initially will need to be able to recognize them. In their book, Beyond Winning, Working Out to Create Value in Deals and Disagreements, Robert Mnookin, Scott Peppett, and Andrew Tulamello offer guidance to keep away from being caught off guard by hard bargainers. The better prepared we're for hard bargaining techniques in negotiation, the better able we will be to diffuse them. Here is a list of the 10 hardball techniques in negotiation to watch out for from the authors of Beyond Winning. 1. Severe demands followed up by little, slow concessions. Perhaps the most common of all hard bargaining methods, this one secures deal makers from making concessions too rapidly. Even so, it can keep parties from making a deal and unnecessarily drag out business settlements. To head off this strategy, have a clear sense of your own objectives, best option to a negotiated contract, BATNA, and bottom line, and do not be rattled by an aggressive opponent. 2. Commitment tactics. Your opponent may say that his hands are tied, or that he has only restricted discretion to talk with you. Do what you can to learn if these dedication strategies are authentic. You could find that you need to talk with a person who has greater authority to do business with you. 3. Take it or leave it negotiation technique. Offers should seldom be non-negotiable. To pacify this hard bargaining tactic, try ignoring it and focus on the content of the offer instead. Then make a counteroffer that meets both parties' needs. 4. Welcoming unreciprocated offers. When you make a deal, you could find that your equivalent asks you to make a concession before making a counteroffer herself. Don't bid against yourself by lowering your needs. Instead, show that you are waiting on a counteroffer. 5. Trying to make you flinch. Sometimes you could find that your opponent keeps making greater and greater needs, waiting on you to reach your snapping point and concede. Name the hard bargaining method and clarify that you'll only take part in a reciprocal exchange of offers. 6. Personal insults and plume ruffling. Personal attacks can feed upon your insecurities and make you susceptible. Take a break if you feel yourself getting flustered, and let the other party know that you will not tolerate insults and other cheap ploys. 7. Bluffing, puffing, and lying. Overemphasizing and misrepresenting facts can toss you off guard. Be hesitant about claims that appear too good to be true and examine them closely. 8. Risks and warnings. Want to know how to deal with threats? The primary step is acknowledging threats and oblique cautions as the hard bargaining tactics they are. Ignoring a threat and calling it danger can be two effective techniques for defusing them. 9. Belittling your alternatives. The other party might try to make you cave in by belittling your BATNA. Don't let her shake your willpower. 10. Good police, bad police. When facing off with a two-negotiator team, you may find that one person is sensible and the other is tough. Understand that they're collaborating, and do not be taken in by such hard bargaining strategies. This has been Negotiating: Bargaining Methods and Essential Negotiation Skills. Written by Tom Hendricks. Narrated by Doug Green.